Everybody, August 13th, 2025, here with your nightly recap and watch list video. So, today, a few days ago, we had kind of been talking about the rate cut narrative and how that will play out into September. I do believe that the Feds are going to be cutting a quarter point in September. That's kind of what they've been hinting at. So, kind of going into that, and then thinking about positioning, we have been talking about for the last few weeks, and even at the beginning of this month, I said that I thought because of positioning within the NASDAQ, you've gotten a bit on the crowded to the long side, and you've got the IWM historically shorted where it's never been more short in its history, and the past 2 days has really shown what can happen when things get crowded on the short side and then things get crowded a little bit on the long side, where you've got the Russell 2000, the IWM absolutely starting to rip and outperform, where you're up almost 2% today for the IWM, and the QQQ actually finishes down just a touch, right? In fact, it might have even been flat just based on closing price. But, basically a 2% outperformance today from the QQQ versus the Russell. So the Russell, is heavily shorted. And it's good to remember, as Jason Shapiro would tell everybody, the biggest losers in the market are small and large speculators. And, based on positioning, you've got the Russell at historically shorted levels. You are above the 200 simple moving average. And you've kind of got this narrative going into September that, we're going to get a quarter point cut. So with that, home builders are moving. You've got biotechs moving, as can be seen by the XBI. Just starting to get on a pickup in volume back over the 200 simple moving average. Just a very nice series of higher lows. And then you pull right into the 50-day, you hold the 50-day, you're consolidating just under the 200, and when you break above the 200, a pickup in volume. What else are you seeing? You're seeing the XHB, which is the home builders ETF, get cleanly above the 200. And if you just kind of looked around the home building sector, Pulte, LEN, KBH, KB Homes, DHI, just all of them really continuation above the 200 simple moving average. Again, series of higher lows. It's struggling to go lower, and they're all kind of falling into the similar theme of, they could be beneficiaries of a rate cut. Does a quarter point really matter for home builders and for people who want to go get a mortgage? No, probably not. It's not the end all be all, but as rates start to come down, the expectation is, maybe people who want to move and don't want to, come off of their 2.5% mortgage rate, well, maybe lower rates will entice them to finally be able to move. It'll kind of unlock the housing market a little bit, and the home builders, are more importantly than anything, more important than the narrative is price. Narrative tends to follow behind price, and what price is telling us right now, for the most part, is that home builders are starting to work above the 200 simple moving average. And like I said a few weeks ago, I really like the idea of nail, and I like the idea of TNA. Right, nail, just really nice 2-day move, right, up $10 today, up 13.5%. I mean, that is just absolutely awesome. And then TNA obviously being your leverage Russell, up 5% today, basically off of yesterday's lows, up almost 14%. I mean, that's huge. So I don't think this trend is done at all. And I think that the Russell or IWM will continue to outperform the QQQ over the coming weeks and potentially months. Mega caps have kind of made a huge move. Banks have made a pretty big move, and a bunch of them were getting hit today. I don't think anything super negative, but for the most part, even a name like IBKR was the one that kind of stood out today. Kind of getting whacked 6%, and then some of the how would I say obvious secondary beneficiaries to the AI boom would be these utility names, these power generators, and the theme has kind of gotten a little, I don't want to say long in the tooth, but you kind of look at a chart, like GEV, and I have been saying, now for the last few weeks, guys, when something goes on an extreme run like this, sideways digestion is really good, and it's good to kind of look back in its stock's history and say, hey, when a stock, just trends, incredibly linearly for a while, and you get a little extended from the 50, the best thing that can happen is just a consolidation. Everybody just thinks charts just continue to go vertical for forever, and that's not the reality. And even a GEV during this consolidation had a wide range bar, had another wide range bar, but it never really broke down. It just kept going sideways, and obviously, nobody could have seen the DeepSeek thing. Everybody got caught on that, like kind of a black swan overnight. But ultimately, this stock looked like it wanted to break out and continue higher after a 7-week consolidation. We get a really nice, clean, linear extended move. 7-week consolidation for a name like GEV with a few wide range bars in between doesn't seem so insane to me. And you started to see it, within the names in the group, a PWR, a CEG, a VST, just more of the same where the group was kind of coming down. And then obviously you've got some of your laggards within the group, and SMR has already been showing some big time weakness, below the 50 simple moving average. And below the 50 for me is not really a time for me to own stocks. Obviously you guys saw, and I'm not trying to compare, apples to oranges, but you lose the 50-day on something like Duolingo, you can really end up rolling over. And not something that I really ever want to argue with. Below the 50 for me is usually the start of the sell cycle. Below the 200 is where things can get super, super tricky and nasty to the downside, and not a place that I like to be long my stock. So that was kind of the notable today. You had the quote-unquote obvious secondary beneficiary to the AI boom, and that is these power generators. And, they are just needing bigger digestion, in my opinion. I've been saying that now for a few weeks, and they haven't really gone anywhere. And now GEV gives a really nice crack, and then now we'll probably just end up digesting for the next several weeks. I don't think that they're done, but there are other things in the market that are kind of garnering the attention. Look no further than Ethereum going completely vertical. And even today, while Ethereum's going vertical, BMNR issuing a ton of paper, just getting, kind of whacked today. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. After a pretty nice move up from the mid 30s to 70s, 100% move, digestion is totally warranted. I thought MSTR stood out a little bit today. You had Bitcoin healthy green on the day, and you had MSTR red on the day and rolling over. You'd just be like, well, what the hell's going on there? Yeah, what the hell is going on there? I have no idea, other than I tweeted about this on the 1st of August, and I just think that, this just feels a little bit like 2021, and it kind of feels like it's on its last legs. Just for, sake of kind of looking back in time, let's just take a peek at how 2021 played out. You had the parabolic move, you had multiple months of underperformance, and then eventually a break below the 200 simple moving average and into its bear market for crypto. And then now you get this parabolic move, you get multiple months of underperformance, 200 starting to catch up. My gut says, this thing starts to break below the 200. Bitcoin kind of starts to get to that, end of the, the move before a much longer period of digestion. I don't know if that's 135, 140, 150,000. And then from there, it's probably sayonara for the time being on the theme. I'm never in the belief that themes just continue on for forever. Eventually they do get tired. They have to unwind some of that sentiment and then rebase, and then eventually they'll kick back into stage 2 much later down the road. But banks acted a little bit weaker today too. I talked about them yesterday, and again, Goldman Sachs held up pretty well. Morgan Stanley, ended up doing something very similar, but kind of during the day they were getting hit. In particular, Interactive Brokers. I didn't think, like I said, anything really wrong with them. I really didn't even think anything too wrong with a name like Nvidia or a Palantir. Yes, it was a small pickup in volume, but just basing here very cleanly, that's kind of what it needs after a super run, and we are still above the 20-day. But the longer we go sideways here, maybe even pull back a little bit more in price, continue to build out a new base. We could pick up a few weeks down the road, in particular when positioning kind of gets a little bit more neutral, right? Everybody is so, everybody who can be in the NASDAQ is in the NASDAQ, and everybody who hates the Russell with their dollar bills. In other words, they're short, and the Russell's going higher, and it's heavily shorted, and the Nasdaq isn't really doing a ton today. Not that it's one day makes a trend, but it is heavily longed. So I still am of the belief that long IWM and then short the Nasdaq is probably a pretty fruitful trade over the next 30 days at the very least, meaning even if the Nasdaq is up 0.5%, the Russell's going to be up 1%. Even when the Nasdaq today is flat, you'd be up 2% on your the IWM. So I think that continues to be a pretty profitable trade. And again, mega caps, I think taking a bit of a breather would be nothing wrong with that at all. Again, just look at a name like Microsoft today, and you would be like, well, what the heck happened today? Why is this thing still digesting after earnings? Well, look at where this thing has come from. A longer base would be totally healthy. And, I talked about NVIDIA yesterday. You get this kind of a frozen rope above the 20 simple moving average. It's very Apple reminiscent of a few years ago, where you kind of just get locked into this uptrend frozen rope, and then all of a sudden on earnings, you kind of get this this crack lower finally, and then it just requires months and months and months of basing, effectively almost a year until we saw new highs. I don't think that would be totally out of the question for NVIDIA. I don't think it'd have to be a year, maybe 4 months, 5 months, 6 months for it to build an entirely new base. That would be completely healthy. And on the flip side of that, AMD continues to kind of lead the way and be the guiding light for the strength in the semiconductors. That name's being completely repriced right now, so that is nice to see. And that's just kind of my thinking. We've got home builders acting well. I'd like to see them shape up a little bit so I can finally get involved. I missed my window to buy nail. I didn't chase up TNA today, so I didn't even chase up ETHU. So it's like I feel like I've been right with the ideas, but then things are gapping up on me, and then I'm not buying ETHU. I want it at 115, and I'm not buying it at 122 or 123. I want a TNA, and I'm just not buying the gap up. So kind of maybe need to be a little bit more aggressive on my ideas, but at the same time, I'll always generate ideas, so I'm not necessarily too concerned about needing to plow myself into things. Stocks either go through my pivot and I will happily buy it, and obviously maybe I can do a better job of sizing things down if I'm going to quote unquote chase something on a gap up higher. So it's just a matter of what you're buying. That is important, and obviously the when is even more important, because as long as you're buying things within theme, themes can go on to work for a whole hell of a lot longer. But yeah, anyway, let's just get into a few of the names. Obviously, I already mentioned the home builders, but for every action like home builder, you've got something like a VRT, right, where it's just like it looks like it's trying to get going yesterday, and then all of a sudden today just a full reversal on a pickup in volume. So that is just the kind of the nature of the beast right now, the trickiness of the environment. If you've already made a really big move, if you're in the NASDAQ, I think it's just best to kind of park those ideas while positioning gets a little bit more neutral in the NASDAQ. I think you're a bit too crowded on that side of the market to get any real fruitful gains from the NASDAQ related names at the moment. I think Chinese equities are something that we should be paying attention to. KWeb in particular, this is a huge base. We will go ahead and see what BABA reports like. I did not chase this gap up. Chasing a gap up's not really my thing. especially in these Chinese equities. They tend to gap so much up and down overnight. I wanted this thing originally over 122.30 and then over 124. You kind of gapped over both of those levels. So, I just left it alone this morning. They've got earnings coming up. So, any kind of a pullback and then a bounce off of call it the 5-day or this, 124 pivot is something that I will be watching going forward. Just when Meta, you think it's breaking out and it's breaking through the high volume close, you give back most of that move today. And, just based on what you saw in the Russell, I will be paying attention to, LabU. I'll be paying attention to Nail. I'll be paying attention to TNA. Those are the leveraged ETFs for home builders, biotechs, and the Russell 2000. I think that's kind of where my brain's at right now. I still like what I'm seeing, within the crypto miner space. I don't think Iron looks too bad. We will see if Iron can kind of get going over today's highs. That could be pretty interesting if we can get going, if Bitcoin's acting well. But again, on the flip side of that, I also want to be, kind of conscious of the fact that like Amara looks pretty disgusting. In fact, it kind of looks like a bit of a bear flag living below the 200 simple moving average. And I don't want to get involved in stocks below the 200. You have to own the best of the best. And for me, that would be Iron. That would be Hut. This thing closed well, gapped up a little bit more in after hours. So I think acting best of the bunch, Iron, Hut, and then, third place, maybe something like Wolf. So just kind of keeping those ideas back of mind just in case the market does want to get rolling. You guys know how I feel about Quantum. I don't love it, but, they're such turds that you can lose $20 million in the quarter and you will still push higher on a pickup in volume. I don't want to argue with that. Either shorts are completely bent backwards, institutions are totally delusional and want to take these stocks higher, and I don't want to argue with it. I do like the way that QBTS looks. I think this is like the best of the bunch. Really nice clean base. We got through earnings, held in there well. I'm comfortable potentially buying this over today's highs. I don't love these names. Don't ask me why. IBM's been working on Quantum since 1980s, and they haven't figured out a damn thing. So if IBM can't figure it out, but Microsoft says they've got something going with it, Google hasn't really said a whisper about it because they're not doing anything with Quantum. Nobody ever really is. I read a paper today that, quantum computers are good for factoring the numbers 15 and 21. So not very impressive, but here we are pricing in the future. Jensen said it was 20 years away, and so that's what we are pricing in 2025. So if that happens, I'm comfortable potentially playing a name like QBTS, smaller speculative size. If these things start to break down, in particular below their 50-day, I'm going to be hammering the hell out of these things on the short side, but not going to argue with it. When you can lose $20 million and you can have a pickup in volume and a breakout over prior day high out of a pretty tight setup, someone's either bent super backwards or we really are pricing in the future, which is just kind of speaks to the environment we're in. And again, these aren't QQQ names, so they're not really, these are more small and mid-cap names. These 15 and $20 billion businesses, and there's just so much money floating around out there that you can make these a $30 billion business, and that's just what Tom Lee's diluting to buy Ethereum. So it's there's just so much money out there right now that this is kind of what the hell's going on. So be bullish until the party stops is kind of my thinking. I did have a short on Roblox, and I added some more today kind of on the 127 breakdown. There was a news that came out and said that Roblox is now investment grade. I have no idea what the hell that even means, considering this thing just went up 100+% more, 200%. So they just became investment grade, which makes no damn sense considering this thing just went up 200%. So they weren't investment grade during any of this uptrend, but now apparently while they're breaking down, they became investment grade. Go effing figure. So, yes, I'm short. If the market begins to weaken, in particular on the NASDAQ side, I will add some more on a break of the 20 simple moving average, kind of targeting the 50 day for potentially some covers, and then just let this thing, this pedophile ridden stock, fall its way all the way to oblivion, is where I think this name belongs. But anyway, those are just some opinions, definitely not financial advice. Make sure you do your own due diligence on a Roblox before sticking your money in this turd. And then TMDX is the other one that I think is pretty interesting. The CEO, if I'm not mistaken, was doing some buying, and what they say, it's like people sell for all sorts of reasons, but they only buy for one. I like Transmedics. I think that the idea of organ transplants is very neat. Definitely not something to marry, but it is doing a nice job building higher lows. It's also doing a nice job staying above the 50. We've gotten through earnings. I don't see a pivot that I love just yet, but I am going to kind of keep my eyes on this name for potentially some follow through in the coming days. Nice little tight day here. We will see kind of what tomorrow brings, but just back of mind, I don't want to get too aggressive here, in particular if they're NASDAQ related. My ideas continue to be the Russell is pretty good with the TNA. Home builders should be pretty good with Nail or XHB. But again, two big days, of price advancement in, home builders and small caps in the TNA. I want to be kind of a little bit more cautious before I go chasing anything. Pullbacks into ascending moving averages should be viable if things are going to go higher. So that is kind of the way I feel. I don't really want to be chasing Ethereum. Yes, I see the price movement. Yes, I missed my entry on ETHU. And no, I'm not happy about that, but I'm also not going to chase anything. You want to buy things as they're coming out of tight areas. You don't want to buy the thing that has already made a big expansion. In terms of the crypto space, the third biggest thing is Tether, aka XRP, and I do like the way XXRP looks. This is an idea going into potentially tomorrow. Obviously, it is lagging a little bit behind the IBIT, Solana, and obviously Ethereum, but if it is going to be a crypto party, hard to imagine a crypto party without Tether. So we will see if we can go ahead and potentially get this one tomorrow. But otherwise, guys, I don't see a ton of other things out here in the market that make me overly excited, right? You still have a DraftKings, nice little tight day. We'll see if this thing wants to start turning back up. And then I am watching an AAOI to see if this thing will establish itself above the 200 simple moving average. Ideally, this did just reject the 20 today. We can get over the 20-day and today's highs. I would be potentially happy to buy this name as a 200 simple moving average undercut and rally. But we just got to wait and be patient and take it one trade at a time. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful, and I will see you all tomorrow for pre-market prep and in the room. Cheers.